Fears are normal, so we face it also in our countries.
If you would lose your sovereignty, that means nobody would be able to leave European Union. And we all know that UK, United Kingdom, left European Union. So it's legitimate to be Eurosceptical. However, you have to be Eurosceptical on the basis of facts. If you see the Brexit, it was mostly about emotions, not about facts.
Just to add a joke on that, so if you are not a member state, you are on the menu. But if you are a member state, then you sit around the table. And you make the menu and you choose from the menu.
Because there are three criteria for joining EU.
So it was like EU for dummies. Hello, Nicoleta. I'm Primoj Vehar. I'm coming from Slovenia, and I am a team leader of EU-founded project here in Moldova, which is supporting EU integration efforts of Moldova.
My name is Vladimir Medjak. I come from Serbia. I'm a legal expert, short-term expert on the project, and expert on accession negotiations.
Well, I would like to ask you about the European integration which Moldova is passing now. And the first question will be, what fears did the citizens from your countries had about the European integration? Because here in Moldova now, there is a false claim that sounds that if European will come in Moldova, the people will lose their lands. So if you can tell us something about that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you start this discussion with fears. So, but I understand living here in Moldova for several years that this is an issue. Fears are normal, so we face it also in our country. So we joined already in 2004, but in 10 years before, besides all the benefits which government and we were all the time underlining, like economic growth, more employment, new working posts, new investments, better roads, investments coming and so on, were also fears. The main was regarding losing our national identity. We are a small country, 2 million citizens, unique language, unique culture. And it was like, it was said, Europe, it's a melting pot, so we will all speak English on the end, or German, and we will lose our identity, what we fight through centuries. And it all showed that it was false, because Slovenian language is one of the official languages now. We have official journal coming in different series every day in Slovenian language. Our representative speaks Slovenian in European Union, so I would say it happened just opposite. Our role and our language and cultural identity even strengthened. And fears among rural population was, for example, we have tradition for New Year, for Christmas, to slaughtering, you know, the pigs and make sausages and all that this will be forbidden in EU, that they will have to go to special slaughtery house with your pig, and then you will get already done sausages out and meat and such things, which is of course nonsense. These old centuries, old habits still remain, and nothing was forbidden. Of course, for private purposes, not that you have industry and you do whatever. This is different. Or for producing domestic schnapps, as we call it, also that will be forbidden, that you produce from apples and pearls and plums domestic spirits, and of course you can do that like now, but not on big quantities, for domestic production and so on. So these fears showed that were mostly not very justified regarding that. So.
Well, this list of fears literally looks like coming from the same playbook. Like this is copy-pasted. Like all the fears that you said are existing here in Moldova, exist in Serbia, and they existed in Slovenia 20 years before. Apart from this, I would also add, like joining EU would make you lose your sovereignty, which actually it's not true, because the owners of the EU are member states. So member states run the EU, it's not the other way around. It's not that EU runs member states, but quite the opposite. And we can see actually this in everyday business, that all the decisions are made by high-level political bodies of the EU, which represent member states. Actually, the European Council, which is composed of heads of states and prime ministers. They make all political decisions. And then it's Council of Ministers, where you have national ministers sitting. So it's not that some, how to say, undefined masses of bureaucrats in Brussels wake up every day and think how to make your life miserable in Moldova. No, they're working for the countries, what countries tell them to do. And one factual proof that this is not true, if you would lose your sovereignty, that means nobody would be able to leave European Union. And we all know that UK, United Kingdom, left European Union after the referendum. And that is the highest level of, highest proof of sovereignty to change your status. Because if you cannot leave European Union, then that means you're not sovereign country. And if you can leave, that means that everybody is sovereign. Then you have, like in Slovenia, we in Serbia use Serbian Cyrillic, which is a unique script. There is also fear that this script is going to be lost. On the contrary to the reality that once we join the EU, our official journal of the EU will be published in Serbian Cyrillics. So all the Serbian citizens would be able to read EU legislation in Serbian language, in Serbian Cyrillics, in the original, from the source of the European journal. Not currently we are reading from Croatian because it's pretty much the same language, and we read the English and the other languages that somebody speaks, French or German usually, but you cannot find it in Serbian. Here you can find it in Romania, so you don't have such a problem. However, in our case, it is a problem how to read EU legislation. Once we join, everybody would be able to read EU legislation in Serbian Cyrillic letter, and Cyrillic script is going to be official language of the EU.
But why do you think this myth appeared in your countries and in our country as well? Why this is happening?
You always have people who are against joining the EU, and this kind of fear-mongering is a good tool. Because you cannot say, if you join the EU, your economy will be destroyed, because all the other countries who joined before you, their economies flourished. You cannot say that you will have less exports when your exports will increase. And this is, these fears that I'm mentioning, this is something that is going not on the rational level, it's going on the emotional level. It's hitting you on the emotional level, and it's very difficult to debate about things like that, because, you know, as they say, the lie travels the world 10 times before the truth actually starts working. Because it takes a lot to fight each and every one of these lies, and every of these lies can be thought within a second. So it's easier, instead of having good arguments why not to join. Being against joining the EU, being Eurosceptical is legitimate. There are people who are Eurosceptical in EU. They're even members of European Parliament. UK, United Kingdom left. I think it's a bad choice for UK, but it's their choice to make, and it is legitimate. So it's legitimate to be Eurosceptical. However, you have to be Eurosceptical on the basis of facts, like the budget should be distributed better, like small countries do not have a say in EU. We should have more voices in Europe. The problem is, when you get into the debate on this level, you can always get a counter response, because this debate is rational debate. When you go to the emotional level, on the emotional level, there is no rational debate. And this is where Euroscepticism actually can win. If you see the Brexit, it was mostly about emotions, not about facts. Because when it came to facts, the facts were you can find counterfacts very soon. But when you go to the emotional level, like we want to rebuild the British Empire, former British Empire, or let's say it was better in the old times in the Soviet Union, or we want to be independent and things like that, like it's very difficult to fight emotional parts.
And it's also good to compare. I mean, you have also small countries like Moldova, which joined with the last waves of enlargement. In 2004, 10 countries joined, and in 2007 was Romania, Bulgaria, 2013 Croatia. You have Baltic states, they were part of Soviet Union like Moldova. So speak with them, ask them what happened, compare economic data, compare employment rates, compare average salaries and all that, and you see with these countries, then you can see Slovenia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, countries which are similar size, and you will see that in every country it was a progress. So GDP raise, foreign investment rate, salaries went up, social protection increased and everything. So there is no country who said we are losers, we lost something, or situation is worse than it was. So it's very easy if you compare just facts of similar countries, and you can get some answers. So why Moldova should be different? And you mentioned land. So in all countries where fears like old member states are much richer and all that, they will buy all your land and flats and houses and all that. Does it happen in Slovenia? No. Does it happen in Croatia? No. Does it happen in Baltic states? No. Were they foreigners buying? Yes. They were disrupted the market of real estate? No, because they bought it, but it's normal. This is European Union, free flow of capital. You cannot prevent that somebody buy a flat in Chisinau if I like it and if I work here. As you can buy in Ljubljana, for example, or somewhere else if you're a citizen of European Union. This is how it works. It's normal, but of course it's not a tragedy, and this does not go on big numbers. So it's completely normal.
If I may add, one of the most important things is how do you look at EU membership. EU membership is not a goal for itself. EU membership is a tool, and the tool for development of a candidate of a country, in this case Moldova, a tool of protecting your national interests. Because what is current situation in Moldova? Your biggest most important economic partner is EU. Your exports goes to the EU. That means that anything that happens in Brussels, every decision in Brussels, sooner or later will reflect on Moldova and economy of Moldova. And can you influence the decisions in Brussels? Now you cannot. But decisions in Brussels influence you. So the only way you can, as Moldova, influence the decisions in Brussels and raise your national flag there and to protect your interests, economical interests, political interests, any other kind of interest, is to be at the negotiating table. And the only way you can do that is if you are a member. If you are an outsider, you cannot. Like, you have countries who are very much linked to the EU, like Norway, like Switzerland, like Iceland. The one thing that they will always say, what is a result of their position, is that they can only affect partially decision-making process in Brussels because they're not at the decision-making table. So they can lobby, they can ask somebody else to help them, but they cannot influence decisions, and those decisions affect them directly. This also happens with my country. Like, the biggest reason Serbia should join is because we would be at the negotiating table, negotiating things like very practical issues. Like, what is the level of allowed noise coming from internal combustion engines, because we have car producing factory in Serbia. If this is reduced, our car factory might be closed. And who is going to defend our car factory if we are not sitting there? The same goes with any kind of economical activity here in Moldova, which is linked to the EU, particularly when it comes to exports.
Just to add a joke on that, so if you are not a member state, you are on the menu. But if you are a member state, then you sit around the table. And you make the menu. And you make the menu, and you choose from the menu.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
This is particularly important for smaller countries.
Okay.
For smaller countries like mine, like Slovenia, like Moldova. Because big countries can protect their interests this way or the other, like UK. But even now, when it left the European Union, UK is out of the decision-making process, and it cannot influence the main processes in the continent. And before that, the UK was one of the leading countries in Europe. Now it's outside. Imagine for a small country like yours or mine trying to influence something in Brussels.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the second question will be that during the European integration process, what methods did you use to combat misinformation?
Well, we didn't have so much misinformation. It was mostly not enough knowledge or not enough awareness what EU brings. So therefore we have a special, let's say, governmental office for information, for dealing with journalists, and also we lawyers from I was from governmental legislative office and so on, help them, and we prepare different brochures. So it was like EU for dummies. What it's EU, how it's function, and these leaflets were sent around and were everywhere available. In every bigger city we have an EU office with information about. Then we make a publication which was also on the internet, whatever you ever want to ask about EU, and there were like questions, can I have piglets at home when we join EU? Can I slaughter my pig? Can I produce my schnapps? How will be with travel? How will be about exporting if you are? So all possible questions for citizens were spread around. We organized also a special bus, which was Eurobus, for example, who was traveling a couple of years around the country. And was every day in another city or village and everything, and there were brochures, people can come and got the brochures about EU, questions about that, what does it bring. They can put questions, I want to know this, and put there on the bus, which have a special box for questions, and this was then electronically answered, and they can read or get directly home answer, and so on. And we joined this bus in different stations, different of us, and helped this office. Parliament was involved very, very heavily, so that members of parliament, which are coming from different parts of the country, of course, they are not all from capital, and people from their parts expect from them to explain, and they ask them, because they have their own office in their constituency, in their place, and we work with parliamentarians, with members of parliament. So we make workshops for them, explain them as governmental officials, what does it bring, what to say, so on. So this was a kind of positive campaign and showing with economic data. So like Moldova, also in my country we have around 70% of external trade, import-export, with the European Union member states, and just 25-30% with others. So similar with you, I checked your data. You have with Russia, you have only around 5% of trade, but with EU you have more than 60, I think around 65, and so on. So this data should be transparent, should be visible. So this process is a process of whole country, not of just of the politicians or some narrow political elites who negotiate and run. So it should be transparent, open, and citizens has to know what it's all about, and also economic operators, because for somebody has to adapt their production. So if they are working different product and under EU rules, they will have to adapt and change their production line. Vladimir mentioned environmental issue. Yes, I mean, if you implement environmental standards like in EU, then you will have to adjust your factory production, make a new machinery, or you will have to put cleaning systems, and then you need time, and they have to know that in advance and all that. So transparency, openness, and there are no hidden things. They should be open and transparent. What does it bring? So,
in our case, speaking about that, data is very important, particularly about what creates life. This is economy. As I believe it was in the Clinton administration, they had this, it's the economy stupid, like this is the main thing, like they didn't talk about anything else. This was the slogan of the campaign in the early 90s. And when you see the trade, Serbia's trade, you see that our trade with current member states and future member states, which are basically the countries of the region in the Western Balkans, these are our neighbors, the current and the future member states combined are 80% of our exports. Like 80%. Our exports to Russia is 4 to 5%. Our exports to China is, let's say, 5%. And when you calculate that we export more to Bosnia, Herzegovina, which is our first door neighbor, than to China, it's very easy to understand where the life is. So who is more important for you? Like first door neighbor, like Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Slovenia, that 25% that they trade with somebody outside the EU is actually us. us from the Western Balkans, meaning future member states. And if you see that, you see where your future is. And we compared, let's say I compared Serbia's trade before World War I, in 1911, before World War I. Kingdom of Serbia was actually trading with the same countries we trade today. It's our neighbors. It's Germany, it's Italy, it's Austria, former Yugoslavia, Slovenia, Croatia, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. Like this is our circle. So anytime somebody would say, well, we do not belong to EU, we should think about BRICS, we should think about China, I said, okay, let's think about China and let's forget 80% of our exports. Where are we going to get that kind of money? Who is going to create those jobs? Because those are jobs, that's 80% of the industry is exporting. So it's always about facts. When Serbian citizens want to emigrate, nobody wants to emigrate to Russia or China, nobody. They'll emigrate to EU and United States and Canada, like that's it. Like you don't emigrate to the East, you go to the West. I met a lot of Moldovan people living in Italy. I think that you may be in some areas the third or the second largest group of non-Italians living in some parts of Italy. So this is where the people actually want to go. And this is how, if people want to live there, why shouldn't their country be in the same group as those countries? So it's always about facts. You can actually, I believe, fight disinformation with facts, but you have to be thorough, and you always have to remember this has to be repeated, like every year for every generation. Because if you did something 5 years ago, it doesn't mean that people remember it. You have to do it all over again.
Now, I would like to ask, where is the organized crime and corruption in the EU accession?
Well, luckily I'm coming from the country which is not known for very much organized crime, but the whole EU accession process has a very positive impact, for example, on corruption. For example, public procurement, it's part of accession negotiations. And we have a lot of much cases before of strange use of public procurements, of delivery of different contracts and all that on untransparent way and all that. And I can say with joining European Union, with accepting common rules and procedure, situation is much better. So it's a very positive effect on general, and it's generally recognized by the population. It's just one example, so you might say more.
The new methodology of running accession negotiations that was adopted in 2020, this is the methodology that is used now with Moldova and with the rest of us candidate countries, pulled all the negotiation chapters. There are 35 negotiation chapters, and they're all organized into 6 clusters. These clusters of chapters, groups of chapters, are there to force the change in real life, meaning you cannot open a cluster without settling all the issues in all the chapters. So if one chapter is lagging behind, that means the entire cluster is lagging behind. And the first cluster, which is called fundamentals, and which is fundamental for the accession, is the cluster that is, among other things, dealing with organized crime and corruption. This cluster has 5 chapters. Chapter on public procurement, as we already said, chapter on statistics, chapter on financial control, and then 2 most important chapters, chapter 23 on justice, corruption and fundamental rights, and chapter 24, which is focused on justice, freedom and security, where you can have fight against organized crime. Like these chapters form the cluster fundamentals. And this cluster is setting the mood of the entire accession negotiations, meaning this cluster has to be open first and will be closed the last, meaning until all the issues in these chapters are settled, you cannot close accession negotiations. These chapters 23 and 24 in justice, organized crime, and rule of law general and corruption, they will have something that is called interim benchmarks. Meaning these are set of conditions that every country has to fulfill, and until you fulfill them, you cannot close any other chapter. This is now the situation in Montenegro. Montenegro is the first country to fulfill these interim benchmarks, and now Montenegro got the roadmap for closing accession negotiations by the end of 26, meaning these chapters, 23 and 24, are the locomotive of everything else. If the locomotive stops, that means all the negotiations stop. If this locomotive goes fast enough, all the accession negotiations will go fast enough. So this is the answer to your question, how important corruption and organized crime are. They're essential. Because there are three criteria for joining EU. First one is political, meaning that you are a democratic country with rule of law, democracy, defense, where you defend, protect minority rights and human rights. Economical, that you can actually sustain living in European open market. And third one is that you harmonize your national legislation with the EU. The first, political criteria, has 5 elements that are graded for every country. First one is judiciary, independence of judiciary. Second one is fight against organized crime. Third one is fight against corruption. Fourth one is freedom of speech, meaning freedom of journalism. And fifth is public administration reform. And you also have functioning of democratic institutions that is assessed separately, meaning the parliament and all the institutions under the parliament scrutiny. So as you can see, fight against organized crime and corruption make 40% of the political criteria, and political criteria is the most important for joining the EU. Because every round of enlargement so far since 1973 had a different major issue. In southern enlargement, let's say Greece, Portugal, and Spain in the 80s, it was about democracy, like anchoring democracy in these countries. In the eastern enlargement, including Slovenia, it was about transforming former planned economy countries into market economy countries. So it was about economy. In this enlargement, meaning Western Balkans, Moldova, and Ukraine, it's about political criteria, it's about the rule of law, it's about democracy, and it's about fights against organized crime and corruption. So this would be the most important part, apart from independence of judiciary, because you cannot have fight against corruption and organized crime without independent judiciary. You cannot have those. Those are two sides of the same coin. Those issues will be assessed separately, and this will be the winning ticket for every candidate country to join. Because without this, nobody would let you join.
Well, now speaking about justice, I would like to ask you, the judicial reform is a key aspect in the EU integration, as you mentioned. And how did you achieve, Slovenia especially, achieve a level of reform that aligns to the EU standards?
Yeah, good question, and we already mentioned judiciary, how important it is. A colleague mentioned, among other legal approximation, one of the main conditions besides political and economic criteria. So, and many times I realize here in Moldova, they're forgetting on judiciary when speaking about legal approximation. Because they said, okay, legal approximation is we draft legislation and parliament adopts and that's it. No, it's not. First is planning. You have to know what will be done today, what tomorrow, what after tomorrow, because some European legislation which you will adopt will have measures and consequences on economy. We mentioned environment, cleaning system, and so on. Then, besides planning, it's drafting and adopting. This is on government. The government normally drafts legislation. Parliament adopts if there are laws. If there are not laws, it's also government with bylaws. So Parliament has a crucial role to scrutiny the whole process and adopt main legislation. And then come implementation in practice with different agencies, police, inspection, and so on. And then comes enforcement. And this is judiciary. So laws must be enforced on the end. So they have to function. If I'm an investor from EU here and I have a problem, I don't get a construction permit, I cannot properly get certain permissions and all, I go to court and I have to expect that justice will come. So you asked for my country. What was problem in my country? My country problem were judicial backlogs. So because judiciary was independent, there was no problem regarding that, but was problem with, let's say, internal not very good organization And despite a huge number of judges, cases were long-lasting, and we lost a lot of cases in Court of Justice in Strasbourg. I think with Moldova it's similar, because you're also a member of Council of Europe for many years. So, and your citizens, when they use all domestic judicial measures, they go to the Human Rights Court to Strasbourg, and we lost a lot of cases because of judicial backlogs. Because no justice on time, justice not on time means no justice. So, and therefore our main reform was to properly organize judiciary system, also set up administrative courts, we didn't exist before, and so on, and also rules of procedure of the courts, procedural rules, rules for the private attorneys and all that. That they are not paid the same for every summoning on the court, but much more for the first one, and then less for the second, less for the third. So it's also interest of private lawyers that they speed up the process, not to extend it as much as possible to earn more money and so on. So this was in my country the main efforts, but I have to admit it was less attention paid at that time on functioning of judiciary, on these main political criteria, as the colleague already mentioned, with more on economic areas and all that, but of course it was, but now it's much, much more. So now judiciary and rule of law and fight against corruption and all that, it's really center of this enlargement process now. So.
Yeah, and another question is, what measures are your country taking to ensure fair and transparent justice system?
Well, one of the first issues in Chapter 23, Judiciary, Fight Against Corruption and Fundamental Rights in Serbia, was to establish constitutional and legal preconditions for independence of judiciary. In our case, that was defined by the Constitution. So Serbia had to change the Constitution first, and then adopt the series of judicial laws, 8 of them, in order to align our judicial system on paper, legally, with EU requirements. And this is one of the benchmarks that we were set. This is one of the interim benchmarks for Serbia. And now that we have done that, EU requests us to demonstrate this independence that was given on paper. It has to be demonstrated in practice, meaning high-level corruption cases have to go to court. That means somebody has to be arrested, prosecuted for high-level corruption. And since we do not have those cases, Serbia still did not manage to fulfill interim benchmarks in Chapter 23, and we do not have the roadmap for closing accession negotiations like Montenegro did, because Montenegro changed the system. They started arresting high-level corruption cases in June, actually in the first half of this year, and in June the European Union said, okay, you fulfill interim benchmarks, now you go to closure of the entire accession negotiations, and they made the roadmap with clear steps how Montenegro will close accession negotiations by the end of 2026. Because some of the goals of Montenegro is to finish by 2026, at least 2027. So now they have the roadmap because they have fulfilled these interim benchmarks, and Serbia did reform legal. This is what Primож said, like we adopted legislation, but now this legislation has to be implemented. And in this case, you must have court cases to show that your independent judiciary is actually functioning, because without that, you don't have the proof that your judiciary is independent. And for us, the next step is actually to show that our judiciary is independent and somebody gets arrested, and then we can actually go to implement interim benchmarks and move to closure of the accession negotiations. Of course, we have other issues to solve as well, but in this case, Montenegro is a good example of how this reform in judiciary is actually determining the pace of accession negotiations, because they have implemented this interim benchmarks now in 24, and I believe they got them in 2014 or 15. So it took them 9 years. And after 9 years, when they did what they were asked to do, they got interim benchmark assessment report, they fulfilled these benchmarks, and then they got the roadmap to finish accession negotiations within 2 years. So this is how important it is. It's crucial.